A lumberjack gave his last bread to a native girl. By morning, a tribal chief asked to shake his hand. Welcome, dear viewers, to another incredible story that will touch your heart and remind you of the power of human kindness. Before we begin this amazing journey through the Old West, I want to ask you to hit that subscribe button right now. Yes, right now. And leave a comment telling us which corner of the world you're listening to this story from. Are you in New York? Maybe São Paulo? Perhaps you're listening from London, Tokyo, or somewhere completely unexpected. We love hearing from our global family, and your comments truly make our day. Now, settle in as we transport you to the rugged frontier of 1870s Wyoming territory, where a simple act of compassion between strangers will change everything. This is a story about Samuel Sam McKinnon, a Scottish immigrant lumberjack, whose generosity toward a young Native American girl named Ayana will lead to an extraordinary encounter that neither he nor anyone in the frontier town of Cedar Ridge could have imagined. Chapter 1. The Last Piece of Bread. The Wyoming wind carried the scent of pine and distant snow as Samuel McKinnon shouldered his axe and began the long walk back to Cedar Ridge. The October sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain that had become his home 3 years ago. Sam's weathered hands, scarred from countless days splitting timber, gripped the handle of his tool as he navigated the rocky path down from the logging camp. At 32, Sam had already lived more hardship than most men twice his age. Born in the Scottish Highlands, he had watched his family lose their land to wealthy landlords, forcing them to seek opportunity across the Atlantic. America had promised freedom and prosperity, but the reality was far harsher. His parents had died during their first winter in New York, victims of disease and poverty. Sam had drifted west, following rumors of work and the possibility of land ownership, eventually finding himself in Wyoming territory, where timber was in high demand for the expanding railroad. The logging camp where Sam worked was a rough place, populated by men who had little and expected less. Most of the loggers spent their wages on whiskey and gambling, but Sam was different. He saved every penny he could, dreaming of the day he might own a small piece of land and build something permanent. He lived simply, often going hungry to stretch his meager earnings. As he walked the familiar trail toward town, Sam felt the gnawing ache in his stomach that had become his constant companion. He had eaten nothing since a small bowl of thin porridge that morning, and his lunch, a single piece of bread wrapped in cloth, remained untouched in his pocket. He had been saving it for when the hunger became unbearable, but now, with only an hour's walk remaining to Cedar Ridge, he decided he could make it without eating. The sound of crying stopped him in his tracks. Sam paused, listening carefully. The wind was picking up, rustling through the pines, but there it was again, the unmistakable sound of a child in distress. He left the main trail and pushed through a grove of aspens, their golden leaves dancing in the breeze. There, sitting beside a small creek, was a girl who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Her long black hair hung in traditional braids, and she wore a simple dress made of soft buckskin, decorated with small beads that caught the fading sunlight. She was clearly Native American, though Sam couldn't tell from which tribe. What was immediately obvious was that she was alone, scared, and hungry. The girl looked up as Sam approached, her dark eyes wide with fear. She scrambled backward, clearly prepared to run, but her movements were weak and unsteady. Sam could see the exhaustion in her small frame. "Easy there, little one," Sam said softly, his Scottish accent still thick despite years in America. "I'm not going to hurt you." He crouched down several feet away, making himself less imposing. The girl watched him warily, and Sam noticed she was clutching her stomach. Her lips were dry and cracked, and her clothes, while well made, showed signs of several days' travel. "You're hungry, aren't you?" Sam asked gently. The girl didn't respond, but Sam could see the answer in her eyes. Without hesitation, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his wrapped piece of bread. It wasn't much, just a chunk of the coarse, dark bread that was standard fare at the logging camp, but it was all he had. Sam unwrapped the bread and placed it on a flat stone between them. Then he stood and took several steps back. "It's for you," he said. "Go ahead." The girl stared at the bread, then at Sam, clearly torn between hunger and caution. After a long moment, she crept forward and grabbed the bread, retreating quickly to her original position. She tore off a small piece and ate it slowly, her eyes never leaving Sam's face. "Say, what's your name?" Sam asked, settling down on a fallen log to make it clear he wasn't going anywhere. The girl swallowed and spoke for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ayanna." "Ayanna," Sam repeated, pronouncing it carefully. "That's a beautiful name. I'm Sam," he pointed to himself. "Do you know where your family is, Ayanna?" The girl shook her head, and Sam saw tears gathering in her eyes. She spoke again, this time in what Sam assumed was her native language, gesturing toward the mountains. Though he couldn't understand her words, her distress was clear. Sam's heart went out to the child. He had known hunger and loneliness himself, but he had been an adult capable of fending for himself. This little girl was completely vulnerable in a harsh landscape that showed no mercy to the weak or lost. As Ayanna continued to eat the bread, Sam noticed movement in the distance. 3 men on horseback were riding along the main trail, and even from this distance, Sam could tell they were trouble. The way they sat their saddles, the casual way they carried their weapons, and their predatory scanning of the landscape marked them as the kind of men who preyed on the vulnerable. "We need to get you out of sight," Sam whispered to Ayanna. Without waiting for her to understand, Sam moved quickly to the girl and gently took her hand. She flinched but didn't pull away as he led her deeper into the grove, behind a cluster of large boulders. They crouched down just as the riders came into view. "Told you we'd find tracks eventually," one of the men was saying, his voice carrying on the wind. "Little savage can't have gone far." "Probably dead by now anyway," another replied with a harsh laugh. "Been 3 days since she ran off from the wagon train." Sam's blood ran cold. These men were hunting Ayanna, and from their casual discussion of her potential death, their intentions were far from benevolent. He looked down at the frightened girl beside him and made a decision that would change both their lives. As the riders moved past and disappeared around a bend, Sam turned to Ayanna and spoke in the gentlest voice he could manage. "I'm going to help you get home," he promised, even though he had no idea how he would accomplish such a thing. "But first, we need to get you somewhere safe." Chapter 2. An Unlikely Alliance. The sun had completely disappeared behind the western peaks by the time Sam and Ayanna reached the outskirts of Cedar Ridge. The frontier town consisted of little more than a main street, lined with false-fronted buildings. A general store, a saloon, a hotel, a blacksmith shop, and a few other businesses that served the needs of loggers, miners, and the occasional traveler. Most of the buildings showed their age, with weathered wood and patched roofs that spoke to the harsh realities of frontier life. Sam knew that bringing a Native American child into town would cause problems. Relations between the white settlers and the various tribes in the region were tense at best, and many of the men in Cedar Ridge harbored deep prejudices that could put Ayanna in danger. But Sam also knew that she needed food, water, and shelter for the night, and his small cabin on the edge of town was the safest option he could think of. "Stay close to me," he whispered to Ayanna as they made their way down a side path that would avoid the main street. Sam's cabin was modest, just one room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, a small table, and a few basic necessities. It wasn't much, but it was clean and dry, and more importantly, it was isolated enough that they were unlikely to be disturbed. Once inside, Sam lit a lantern and gestured for Ayanna to sit on the bed while he rummaged through his meager food supplies. He found some dried beans, a small piece of salt pork, and a precious handful of cornmeal. It wasn't much, but it would make a decent stew. As Sam prepared the meal, Ayanna watched him with curious eyes. The fear from earlier had diminished somewhat, replaced by the cautious interest of a child trying to understand this strange man who had shown her such unexpected kindness. "Your family," Sam said as he stirred the pot hanging over the fire. "Good. Do you remember which direction they went?" Ayanna pointed northwest, toward the distant mountains that formed the backbone of the continent. She spoke in her native language, and though Sam couldn't understand the words, her tone conveyed urgency and longing. "They're looking for you, aren't they?" Sam asked, and Ayanna nodded vigorously. As the stew cooked, filling the small cabin with its aroma, Sam found himself studying the girl more closely. Despite her obvious ordeal, there was something regal about her bearing, a dignity that seemed unusual for someone so young. Her clothes, too, while travel-worn, were of exceptional quality, with intricate beadwork that spoke to skilled craftsmanship and perhaps some level of importance within her tribe. The stew was ready just as someone knocked on Sam's door. Both Sam and Ayanna froze. In the 3 years Sam had lived in Cedar Ridge, no one had ever visited his cabin after dark. He motioned for Ayanna to hide behind the bed, then moved cautiously to the door. "Who's there?" he called out. "Sam McKinnon." The voice was unfamiliar, cultured with an Eastern accent. "My name is Thomas Henley. I'm afraid I have urgent business with you." Sam cracked the door open and found himself face to face with a well-dressed man in his 50s, wearing an expensive coat and hat despite the frontier setting. Behind him stood 2 other men, clearly bodyguards or hired guns based on their stance and the way their hands rested near their weapons. "What kind of business?" Sam asked, not opening the door any wider. "The kind that involves a missing Indian girl," Henley replied smoothly. "I represent certain interests that would very much like to recover her. There's quite a substantial reward for information leading to her whereabouts." Sam's grip tightened on the doorframe. "I don't know anything about any missing girl." Henley smiled, but it was a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course not, but if you should happen to come across any information, I'm staying at the hotel. The reward is $500, Mr. McKinnon. That's more money than a lumberjack sees in 2 years. After the men left, Sam barred the door and returned to where Ayanna was hiding. The girl's face was pale with fear, and she spoke rapidly in her native language, clearly agitated by the proximity of the strangers. "They're the ones who took you, aren't they?" Sam asked, and Ayanna's vigorous nodding confirmed his suspicion. Sam served the stew, watching as Ayanna ate hungrily. As she did, he tried to piece together what had happened. The girl had somehow escaped from these men, who were clearly not simple bounty hunters but something more organized and dangerous. The amount of the reward suggested that Ayanna was valuable to them for reasons beyond simple human trafficking. "We need to get you back to your people," Sam said quietly, "but we'll have to be very careful." As if reading his thoughts, Ayanna reached into a small pouch at her waist and pulled out something that made Sam's breath catch. It was a small medallion, clearly of Native American manufacture, but made of what appeared to be pure silver and decorated with symbols that seemed to indicate high rank or importance. "Your father," Sam said, pointing to the medallion and then to Ayanna. "He's important, isn't he? A chief?" Ayanna's eyes filled with pride as she nodded, and she spoke a single word that Sam didn't understand, but somehow knew was her father's name. Everything suddenly made sense. Ayanna wasn't just any Native American child. She was the daughter of a tribal leader, possibly taken as leverage in some kind of negotiation or conflict. The men hunting her represented interests that saw her value as a political prisoner rather than simply a person. Sam made his decision. Tomorrow, he would find a way to return this brave little girl to her family, regardless of the personal cost. But first, they both needed rest for what would undoubtedly be a dangerous journey. As Ayanna curled up on his bed and Sam settled down on the floor beside the dying fire, he couldn't help but think about the strange turns life could take. Yesterday, he had been simply another anonymous laborer struggling to survive in an unforgiving land. Today, he had become the protector of a chief's daughter, with powerful and dangerous enemies seeking to reclaim her. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, and Sam wondered if he would live to see another sunset. Chapter 3. The journey into the unknown dawn broke grey and cold over Cedar Ridge, with thick clouds promising snow before nightfall. Sam woke to find Ayanna already awake, sitting by the small window and staring out at the mountains in the distance. Her longing to return home was written clearly in every line of her small body. Sam had spent much of the night thinking about their situation. He knew that Henley and his men would be watching the town, waiting for any sign of Ayanna. A direct approach was impossible, but Sam had spent 3 years learning the mountain trails and logging roads. If anyone could navigate the treacherous terrain between Cedar Ridge and the tribal lands to the northwest, it was him. "We'll leave after dark," he told Ayanna as he prepared a simple breakfast of cornbread and coffee. But first, I need to gather some supplies." Sam's plan was risky but simple. He would go about his normal routine, reporting to the logging camp as usual, but instead of working, He would use his familiarity with the area to procure the supplies they would need for the journey. More importantly, he needed to find out exactly where Ayana's people were camped. Before leaving, Sam fashioned a hiding place for Ayana in a small root cellar beneath the cabin's floorboards. It wasn't comfortable, but it was completely concealed, and he left her with water, food, and strict instructions not to make any noise no matter what happened above. At the logging camp, Sam sought out Jake Thornton, an older logger who had worked the territory for over a decade. Jake was one of the few men Sam trusted, and more importantly, he had dealings with several of the local tribes, trading manufactured goods for furs and information about game movements. "Jake," Sam said, pulling the older man aside, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to keep it quiet." Jake studied Sam's face and nodded slowly. "What's on your mind, Sam?" "The Shoshone. Where are they camped for the winter?" Jake's eyes narrowed. "That's an odd question, even for you. Why do you want to know?" Sam had prepared for this. "I've been thinking about trying some trading myself. Heard there might be good money in it." "There is," Jake replied slowly, "but it's dangerous work. The Shoshone are peaceful enough if you treat them fair, but they don't take kindly to strangers showing up unannounced." He paused, studying Sam's face. "They've got a winter camp in the valley beyond Eagle's Peak, maybe 2 days, hard riding north and west of here. But Sam, if you're thinking of heading up there alone, you're asking for trouble." Sam nodded his thanks and spent the rest of the morning quietly gathering supplies. He took a few items from the camp's stores: rope, dried meat, a waterproof tarp, things that wouldn't be missed immediately but would be essential for their journey. He also stopped by the general store in town, using some of his precious savings to buy additional food and a heavy coat that might fit Ayana. As he made his purchases, Sam noticed one of Henley's men watching him from across the street. The man made no attempt to hide his surveillance, which Sam found more unsettling than if he had tried to be covert. It suggested a confidence that made Sam nervous. When Sam returned to his cabin that evening, he found Ayana exactly where he had left her, though she was clearly relieved to see him. As darkness fell, Sam explained his plan using a combination of simple English words and gestures. "We'll follow the old mining trail north," he said, pointing to a crude map he had drawn. "It's longer than the main road, but less likely to be watched." Ayana listened intently, her dark eyes serious beyond her years. When Sam finished explaining, she spoke in her native language, her tone urgent and worried. Though Sam couldn't understand her words, her meaning was clear. She was concerned about the danger he was placing himself in for her sake. "It's the right thing to do," Sam said simply, and something in his tone seemed to reassure her. They left the cabin just after midnight, moving carefully through the shadows at the edge of town. Sam had wrapped Ayana in the new coat and fashioned a pack that she could carry despite her small size. He carried a larger pack with their supplies, along with his axe and an old rifle he had acquired in trade the previous year. The mining trail was barely more than a game path, winding through dense forest and across rocky slopes that would be treacherous even in daylight. Sam had brought a shuttered lantern, but he dared use it only when absolutely necessary, relying mostly on his knowledge of the terrain and the faint starlight filtering through the clouds. For the first few hours, they made good progress. Ayana proved to be remarkably hardy for such a young child, keeping up with Sam's pace without complaint, despite the difficult terrain. But as they climbed higher into the mountains, the temperature dropped and snow began to fall, first as scattered flakes and then as a steady, blinding curtain. By dawn, they were both exhausted and nearly frozen. Sam found a small cave formed by an overhang of rock, and they took shelter to rest and eat. Ayana had grown increasingly excited as they traveled north, pointing out landmarks that clearly meant something to her. They were getting close to her home territory. "How much further?" Sam asked, and Ayana held up 2 fingers, then pointed to the sun to indicate days, 2 more days. Sam looked at their dwindling supplies and the steadily worsening weather, and wondered if they would survive that long. But when he looked at Ayana's hopeful face, he knew he would find a way to get her home, even if it cost him his life. As they prepared to continue their journey, Sam heard something that made his blood run cold. The distant sound of horses and men's voices carried on the wind from somewhere behind them. Henley had found their trail. Chapter 4. The Chase Through the Mountains. The sound of pursuit grew steadily closer, as Sam and Ayanna pressed deeper into the wilderness. Sam's years of experience in the mountains served them well as he led them off the established trail and into terrain that would challenge even experienced horsemen. But he knew that their pursuers were determined and well-equipped, and it was only a matter of time before they would be forced to make a stand. The snow continued to fall, which worked both for and against them. While it helped obscure their tracks, it also made travel more difficult and dangerous. Sam noticed that Ayanna was beginning to show signs of serious fatigue, her small legs struggling with the deepening snow and steep terrain. "Can you go a little further?" Sam asked during one of their brief rest stops. Ayanna nodded bravely, but Sam could see that she was near the end of her endurance. He made a difficult decision. He would have to carry her, even though it would slow them down significantly. For the next several hours, Sam struggled through the wilderness with Ayanna on his back, following game trails and natural features that he hoped would confuse their pursuers. The child had fallen asleep despite the cold and discomfort, a sign of how exhausted she truly was. As afternoon approached, Sam found himself at the edge of a vast canyon that cut deep into the mountain landscape. He recognized it from Jake's descriptions. They were close to the valley where the Shoshone had their winter camp, but the canyon represented a significant obstacle. The only way across was a narrow natural bridge of stone that spanned the chasm about a quarter-mile to the north. Sam was studying the bridge through the falling snow when he heard the unmistakable sound of horses approaching from behind. They had been found. "This is far enough, McKinnon." Sam turned to find Thomas Henley and 4 armed men emerging from the tree line. The men had their weapons drawn, and Henley wore the satisfied expression of someone who had finally cornered his prey. "You've led us on quite a chase," Henley continued conversationally. "But it's time to be reasonable. Hand over the girl, and we'll let you walk away from this." Sam gently lowered Ayanna to the ground behind him, placing himself between her and the armed men. The girl had awakened at the sound of voices and was now clinging to Sam's coat, her eyes wide with terror. "I don't think so," Sam replied, his hand moving slowly toward the axe at his belt. Henley sighed dramatically. "Mr. McKinnon, you clearly don't understand what you're dealing with. This child is worth more than money to certain parties. Her father has something we need, and she is our leverage to obtain it. This is business, nothing personal." "It became personal when you started hunting a little girl," Sam shot back. "How noble," Henley said mockingly. "But also foolish. You're outnumbered 5 to 1, and you have a child to protect. Be sensible." Sam glanced quickly around, assessing their options. The canyon was at his back, the natural bridge to his right, and armed men to his front and left. But he noticed something that Henley and his men had apparently missed: smoke rising from the valley beyond the canyon. The Shoshone camp was just on the other side of the chasm. "Ayanna," Sam said quietly without turning around. "Can you see the smoke?" The girl peered around him and gasped, speaking excitedly in her native language. She had seen it too. They were within sight of her home. "Can you make it across that bridge?" Sam asked. Ayanna looked at the narrow stone span and nodded determinedly. Sam knew it was a desperate gamble, but it was their only chance. "When I say run," Sam whispered, "you head for that bridge and don't look back." Before Henley could react, Sam suddenly threw himself to the side, drawing his axe as he rolled. The movement was so unexpected that it caught the armed men off guard for crucial seconds. "Run!" Sam shouted. Ayanna darted toward the natural bridge as Sam came up from his roll and charged the nearest gunman. The man's shot went wide as Sam's axe knocked the rifle from his hands. The other men were scrambling to get clear shots without hitting their companion, giving Ayanna precious seconds to reach the bridge. Sam fought with the desperate strength of a man protecting something more valuable than his own life. His axe swept in deadly arcs, keeping the gunmen at bay, but he knew he couldn't hold them off for long. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Ayanna beginning to cross the narrow bridge, her small form silhouetted against the falling snow. A rifle shot cracked through the air, and Sam felt a burning pain in his shoulder. He stumbled but managed to keep his feet, swinging his axe in a wide arc that forced his attackers back a few steps. "Enough!" Henley shouted. "Take him alive if possible, but don't let the girl escape." 2 of the men broke away from the fight and ran toward the bridge. But Sam wasn't finished. Despite his wound, he threw himself after them, tackling one man and sending both of them tumbling toward the edge of the canyon. The second man reached the bridge just as Ayana was halfway across. Sam watched in horror as the gunman raised his rifle, taking careful aim at the small figure on the narrow stone span. The shot echoed across the canyon, but it wasn't the gunman who fired. From the far side of the bridge, a dozen Shoshone warriors had appeared as if from nowhere, their own rifles trained on Henley's men. The gunman who had been about to shoot Ayana was now lying motionless in the snow, and the others had their hands raised in surrender. Ayana reached the far side of the bridge and threw herself into the arms of a tall, dignified man whose bearing and dress marked him as a chief. Even from a distance, Sam could see the joy and relief in their reunion. The chief spoke briefly to his warriors, and several of them crossed the bridge to where Sam lay bleeding in the snow. To his surprise, they helped him to his feet with gentle hands, and one of them examined his wounded shoulder with obvious medical knowledge. As Sam was helped across the bridge, he found himself face to face with Ayana's father. The chief was a man of perhaps 50 years, with silver threads in his long black hair and eyes that held both wisdom and strength. He studied Sam for a long moment, then spoke in accented but clear English. "You brought my daughter home," he said simply. Sam nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted and injured he was. "She's a brave girl. She never gave up hope of seeing you again." The chief's expression softened. "Ayana has told me what you did, how you gave her your last food, how you risked everything to bring her to safety." He paused, his dark eyes intense. Such courage and kindness cannot go unrewarded. Chapter 5. Honor among strangers. The Shoshone winter camp was unlike anything Sam had ever seen. Hidden in a sheltered valley surrounded by towering peaks, it consisted of dozens of well-constructed lodges arranged in careful patterns that spoke to generations of accumulated wisdom about survival in harsh conditions. Smoke rose from numerous fires, and despite the remote location and bitter weather, the camp radiated a sense of security and prosperity. Sam was taken to the chief's lodge, where tribal healers tended to his wounded shoulder, with skills that impressed him greatly. They used a combination of traditional plant medicines and techniques that were clearly effective, cleaning and binding the wound with gentle efficiency. Throughout the treatment, Ayana stayed close by, translating between her father and Sam when necessary. "My daughter tells me that men were hunting her for political reasons," the chief said as Sam recovered from the medical treatment. "She says they spoke of needing leverage against me." Sam nodded, his head still somewhat fuzzy from the herbal pain medicine the healers had given him. "A man named Henley. He seemed to think you had something they wanted." The chief's expression grew grim. "For months, government agents have been pressuring our people to sign a new treaty that would move us to a smaller reservation. We have refused because the proposed land cannot support our people through the winter." He gestured toward the thriving camp around them. "They thought that by taking Ayana, they could force my hand." "What will happen to them?" Sam asked, thinking of Henley and his men. "They will be escorted to the territorial capital and turned over to the authorities," the chief replied. "What they did was kidnapping, which is a crime even by white man's law." As Sam's strength returned over the following days, he found himself welcomed into the daily life of the camp in ways that surprised him. The Shoshone people treated him not as an outsider, but as someone who had earned a place among them through his actions. Children brought him small gifts. Adults included him in conversations, and he found himself learning basic words and phrases in their language. Ayana had become his constant companion, apparently having appointed herself as his guide and interpreter. Through her, Sam learned more about the tribe's situation and the pressures they were facing from an expanding American government that seemed determined to control every aspect of their traditional way of life. "My people have always been willing to share the land," the chief explained during one of their many conversations, "but we cannot agree to arrangements that will mean death for our children and elders." Sam found himself deeply moved by the dignity and wisdom of these people, who had been portrayed as savages by most of the whites he had known. Their society was complex and sophisticated, with systems of governance, education, and resource management that had sustained them for generations in one of the continent's most challenging environments. On his fourth day in the camp, the chief approached Sam with a serious expression. "You have been more than kind to an injured stranger," Sam said before the chief could speak, "but I should probably be getting back to my own life." The chief shook his head. That is what I wanted to speak with you about. Word has reached us that the men who employed Henley are not finished with their schemes. They know that you helped Ayana escape, and they consider you a threat to their plans. Sam felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. What are you saying? I am saying that Cedar Ridge is no longer safe for you, the chief replied. These are powerful men with long memories and little conscience. The implications hit Sam like a physical blow. His small cabin, his job, the modest life he had been building, all of it was now lost because he had chosen to help a frightened child. Seeing his expression, the chief placed a hand on Sam's uninjured shoulder. Sure, but I'm also saying that you have a place here if you want it. Sam looked around the camp, taking in the sight of people going about their daily lives with purpose and contentment despite the challenges they faced. It was a good life, he realized, built on principles of community and mutual support that had been largely absent from his previous existence. I don't know anything about your ways, Sam said uncertainly. The chief smiled for the first time since Sam had met him. Ayana has volunteered to teach you. She says you are a good student. Sam looked down at the little girl who had inadvertently changed his entire world. She grinned up at him and spoke rapidly in her native language. She says, the chief translated with obvious amusement, that you already know the most important lesson, how to share your last piece of bread with someone who needs it more than you do. As winter deepened around the hidden valley, Sam found himself settling into a new life that was both challenging and rewarding in ways he had never imagined. He learned to hunt with traditional methods, to craft tools and shelters using techniques perfected over generations, and to think of survival not as an individual struggle, but as a community effort. Most importantly, he learned that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars or land ownership, but in the bonds of trust and mutual respect that connected people to each other and to the natural world that sustained them. When spring finally arrived and the snows began to melt, Sam realized that he no longer thought of himself as a temporary guest in the Shoshone camp. Somewhere during the long winter months, it had become home. The chief found him one morning sitting beside the stream that ran through the valley, watching Ayana and the other children playing in the early spring sunshine. Do you miss your old life? The chief asked, settling down beside him. Sam considered the question seriously. Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it, he admitted, but I don't miss the loneliness. The chief nodded thoughtfully. Loneliness is a kind of poverty that no amount of money can cure. Chief, Sam said after a moment, I never properly thanked you. For what? For trusting a stranger enough to let him into your family. The chief was quiet for a long moment, watching his daughter laugh as she played with her friends. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of deep conviction. Samuel McKinnon, he said, using Sam's full name formally, the moment you chose to give your last bread to a hungry child, you stopped being a stranger. You became family. As the sun climbed higher in the clear mountain sky, Sam reflected on the strange journey that had brought him to this place. Her simple act of kindness, sharing a piece of bread with a frightened child, had cost him everything he thought he wanted and given him everything he had never known he needed. He thought about the men back in Cedar Ridge who would spend their lives chasing individual wealth and security, never understanding that true prosperity could only be found in community, compassion, and the willingness to sacrifice for others. Sam smiled as Ayana ran over and grabbed his hand, chattering excitedly about something she wanted to show him. As she led him toward whatever adventure awaited, he knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. Conclusion. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey through the American frontier, where a simple act of kindness between strangers bridged two worlds and changed everything. Sam's choice to share his last piece of bread with little Ayana reminds us that sometimes the smallest gestures can have the most profound consequences. If this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories of courage, compassion, and the extraordinary power of human connection. And remember, we still want to hear from you. Drop a comment and let us know where in the world you're listening to our stories. Whether you're in bustling New York City, sunny California, the mountains of Colorado, or somewhere on the other side of the globe, We love connecting with our incredible community of listeners. Until next time, remember that kindness costs nothing but can change everything. Sometimes, all it takes is being willing to share your last piece of bread.